Hi, welcome to Board Game Express. Today we're going to set up and teach Power Grid. So Power Grid, all of the players play different electric companies who are competing to build power plants and build cities on the map in order to earn more money, to build more power plants, and eventually build enough and power enough cities to trigger the end game. Now, the first thing I want to mention about Power Grid is because it's an older game and there have been a lot of iterations and different versions that have come out over time. So one of the things you'll have to be aware of is that the rule sets have kind of changed over time. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try and condense some of the things that have happened and provide the rule sets for a little bit of a mix between an older set and the newest modern set. Now, of course, if you buy a very new copy of Power Grid, it'll have its own precise rule set and you should follow that. And even occasionally, the game has come out with different decks of power plants to use. So there are a lot of different ways this will be played. But I just want to point that out so that if you see something that doesn't quite match what you read, just go ahead and use whatever version you have. All right, now to set up, first you're going to want to lay out the 4 resources along the bottom here. Coal is going to be set up all the way down from the maximum price down to $1. Oil is going to be set out to $3. Nuclear, the red, is going to have a token on the 16 and the 14. And garbage, in the original rules, you will set out 3 at the $8 and then 3 more at the $7 spot. But an official update to the rules has the players also loading the 6. So if you do have an original copy of the game, you may want to make that adjustment. It makes things a little more balanced. Alright, now, players are going to choose a color. They're going to start with $50 and go ahead and pick a random turn order to start. It's going to adjust very soon, so it's largely not going to matter. And finally, put a house for each player over on this chart. This chart keeps track of how many cities each player has built, which is going to go towards determining the turn order. Alright, now the first thing to do as you're getting ready to play is that there's going to be a chart in some of the rule books, and if you do not have this chart, then you're just going to want to go online into Board Game Geek and look it up. It will tell you a couple things about the setup, such as which regions to remove depending on the player count, and how many cards to remove from the power plant deck, as well as how many cities trigger the various points in the game. Now, I'll teach this as if it's a 3-player game, so we've got Bluey, Mr. Green, and Red here. But just be aware that that is going to alter some of what happens, right? Now, the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to remove sections from the board according to the player count. And in a 3-player game, you'll actually only use 3 sections of the board. Now, an easy way to do this is the game comes with 6 player colors, and they largely match the 6 colored regions on the board. Other than black here in player pieces is going to have to go with brown. So what I usually do is I just pick, alright, red zone is in the game, purple zone is in the game, and then green zone is in the game. Alright, there you go. 1, 2, 3. Those are the 3 zones that the players will be playing in. And what you can do is you can perhaps use another player color that is not in the game to block off all the borders to the unplayable area. So something like that, and lay out more black along here so you're not allowed to play in these 2 zones. And also block off the blue zone over here as well. Now obviously you have to pick zones that actually connect to each other. So if you accidentally, you can't play in blue, yellow, and tan, for example, and then have this cut out and into 2 sections. Like, you're only supposed to be playing in 1 section. So that's the first thing you're going to want to do. The next thing you want to do is set up the power plant board. You will put out all of the smallest numbered plants to start the game, so 3 through 10. Have them set out in order like this. And for the rest of the deck, 2 things. You're going to want to pull out the step 3 card, and you're also going to want to pull out the 13 valued card. So those are out. From the rest of the deck, you're going to shuffle it, and in a 3-player game, you're going to remove 8 of these power plants randomly. Just toss them out of the game. 4 players, you're going to remove 4. In 5 and 6 player, you will not remove any. And then, after you've shuffled this, the step 3 card, which is a bit of a game clock, goes on the very bottom. And then the 13 numbered is going to go on the very top as the first of the draw, like this. Alright, so once you've got the regions in play and you have your power plants, you're ready to start. Now, every turn is going to have 5 parts. You're going to start by manipulating the turn order to reflect how everybody has built. Then you're going to spend a phase buying another power plant. Third, you're going to buy resources for those power plants. Fourth, you're going to build new cities to expand your network. And then the 5th phase is really just the bureaucracy phase, where you're going to earn money and you're going to update the board to reflect and then check to see if the game has ended. Alright, so the first thing to do is to determine player order. Now, player order is going to be random at first, but it's going to be set up very soon in this part of the game. The player who has built the most cities, now just built cities, regardless of whether they are powered or not, player who has the most built cities is going to go first. If there's a tie, then whichever player has the highest single numbered power plant is going to go first. So, if one player has a 7 and another player has a 10, the player who has the 10 is going to be considered first. Next, after you've determined turn order, you are going to auction off new power plants. Now, this is done in forward turn order. The player who's first player, who has the most cities, is going to be first to choose. In theory, this is a disadvantage because when you are choosing a power plant, in the beginning of the game, you can only choose from the top row, meaning the 4 lowest and usually weakest of the power plants. Now, on your turn, you can do one of 2 things. You can either pass, or you can put one of those 4 power plants up for bid. Now, if you pass picking up a power plant, this is very important to understand. If you choose not to put one up, then you are out of the bidding for the entire round. You will not be allowed to buy a power plant later on. So, if you do not want one of the 4 that are available to you, the only thing you can do is to put one up that you think an opponent's going to want and have them overbid you, so that then you can get the one you really want later. So, anyway, you put one power plant up for bid, and then in turn order, everyone bids. The number up here in the corner, the 4, is the minimum bid, as well as sort of the power plant index number. On the bottom is the fuel type and the fuel number that you need in order to power that number of cities. So, for example, 2 coal will power 1 city in this case. Now, you bid, so bid 4, bid 5, whatever, and once you pass, you're out, and in the end, when someone wins the bid, they get the power plant, pay your money to the bank, and then you're going to refill the market with another power plant. In the beginning, it's going to be the 13 because you've set it up that way, but in the future, it will be random. Now, when the new power plant is put in, then you must reorder all of them to keep numerical order. You will not just put it in the empty spot. You're going to slide everything over like this, and then you're going to follow the numerical ordering of the power plants. After a person has won a power plant, you're only allowed to win 1 per turn. That player is sort of out for the turn. Blue would still choose again, and so blue puts one up, bid 3, maybe red doesn't want it, wins. You would draw another power plant. Red would now have a choice between these, so let's just say red chooses this one. Once there's only 1 player, you get it for the minimum bid because there's no one to bid against you. And then you would continue to refill. Now, only on the first turn, you have to buy a power plant, and you have to reorganize turn order after buying these power plants. Now, normally during the game, doing turn order happens first before you do the power plants. Only on the first turn of the game, you do that backwards. So basically, you'll have a quick reordering right here. Green's going to have the highest. Actually, red's going to have the highest here. Green, and then blue. All right. So now, once you are done with the power plants, Then it's time in reverse turn order to buy resources for your power plants. Now, a couple things about resources. Each power plant can only hold the type of power that it needs, so coal or oil, or in the case of this 5, this little symbol here is a hybrid. It can take oil or coal in any combination. You can even use one of each if you wanted to. That's perfectly fine. Now, power plants are only allowed to hold a maximum of twice their usage capacity in storage. So if you have this power plant here that costs 2 oil per use, you are allowed to put up to 4 in here. You can put 1, 2, 3, or 4. 1's not a good idea because you don't have enough to use it. Now, once the first player has purchased, next player, once everyone has purchased, then it's time to move on to the last bit, which is building cities. Now, the cost of building cities is going to depend on a lot of the visuals you see on the board. In every city, you're going to notice that it's broken up into 3 parts, a 10, a 15, and a 20 section. What that essentially means is that in anything other than a 2-player game, only 3 players are allowed to eventually occupy a given city, and no player can you can't score the same city 2 times. Like, you can't build 2 generators in the same city. That's not the objective here. Now, the first person in a city is going to pay 10 to build there. The second 15, and the third 20. So that's what that means. In the beginning of the game, however, not all 3 of those zones are available. I'll explain that in a moment. So the first player to build is going to be reverse turn order. So it's going to be blue first. And for your first city, you can build it anywhere at a base cost of 10. So let's say, for example, go right there. Now, if you wanted to build more, you can build as many as you have money for. It is not restricted by the number of power plants you have or what types in any way. Once you have your first city, any additional cities you pay, you're going to have to also, in addition to the 10, pay what's called the connection cost, and that is the number you see between the 2 cities. Now, later on in the game, I want to point out that I guess what you can probably see already is that there is greatly the potential for blocking and interfering with each other's builds in this game. So let's say blue stopped at 1, green may get a little combative and build right next to it, and who knows, maybe red says, yeah, maybe crowding blue isn't such a bad idea. So here's the thing. While there is blocking in this game, sort of, the truth of the matter is you are allowed to build anywhere you want. The only restriction is that when you, let's say blue wanted to build here, if you are to jump into a non-adjacent city, then in addition to the 10, you have to pay every connection cost in between. And that may result in, if you double back later on in the game, you're going to have to repay a connection cost because you kind of had to jump over it the first time. That's pretty much the only consequence. But essentially, you cannot be blocked out. You kind of just have to pay for the jump. Right, now, once everyone has finished building cities, it is time to score your power plants and then set up for the following turn. So let's just pretend that blue had purchased, well, it's over here. Let's pretend green had purchased 4 coal. The cost will be printed, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 total. And again, let's pretend blue here bought 2 oil. And then, because red has a hybrid plant, he can choose either or. Since it's cheaper, he's going to choose the coal. Now notice I had green overbuy because green was buying before the player who could also use the coal, so just kind of preemptively picking up the resources at the cheaper price, not letting the other person get it for a single dollar. That's something you're going to consider during the course of the game. Now, everyone is going to, at this point, power. So this guy is going to discard 2, discard 2. That goes back into the supply. And everyone is going to score on your little player chart here. However many cities you powered, that's how much money you collect. So if you power 1 city, everyone gets $22. And that round is over. You will go back to setting the player order, auctioning, etc., etc. Now, there are a couple of other bureaucratic things to deal with. 1, when everyone has finished using their power plants, then you're going to reload the market down here according to the chart on the back of the instructions. So this is going to be based on player count and based on what is called the step of the game, or the stage of the game, if you want to think it that way. You start at stage 1, so in this case you would go to the 3-player stage 1 and you would refill that number of coal, oil, garbage, and nuke. Just refill it down to the next lowest price. Now finally, the last thing that's going to happen at the end of a round is that you're going to slightly refresh the power plant market. You're going to take the highest numbered plant that's showing at that time. It won't be the 13. You know what? Let's just put out 2 more random ones. So let's say during the auction you drew a 24 and a 37, right? So you're going to update, put everything in order. You're going to take the highest numbered one, so in theory the strongest. You're going to put it on the bottom of the deck, and you're going to immediately fill it with a new random draw, so 31, and then put it down. So the reason you do this is to ensure that the strongest power plants kind of sit at the bottom of the deck, and so that they are saved for the end of the game. You don't want too strong of the power plant to come out too early. Alright, and that is the final thing that you do in the round. Right. Now, there are a couple other things to understand about how to manage the bureaucracy. First is, depending on player count, once a player has built a certain number of cities, and for a 3-player game that number is 7. So once a player has built a 7th city, then the game will enter immediately what's called step 2, or stage 2. So when that happens, the first thing you have to do, a little tricky to remember, you immediately discard and replace the lowest power plant out of the game. And from this point on, each city is now allowed to have a second person build in it at the price of 10. If you're the first person in it, you still only pay 10. If you're the second person in it, you're going to pay 15 in addition to any of the connection costs. Right? So that will be the trigger for stage 2. Now, stage 3, and by the way, once you're in stage 2, don't forget you're going to be upgrading you're going to be reloading the resource chart according to the stage 2 part of the chart. And finally, the last stage of the game is going to be triggered by, remember when you started the game, you put this step 3 card down at the bottom of the deck? Well, eventually you're going to go through the deck and it's going to make its way to the top. When you draw that card, eventually, that is going to be the trigger for stage 3. And when this card is drawn, then here's what happens. You will place it as if it is the higher number power plant of the time. You will continue, if this were to happen during an auction, you would continue with the rest of the auction with it basically blocking one space. The moment it comes out, you will shuffle what remains of the deck. That should be all of those high numbered cards you put on the bottom in the very beginning and middle parts of the game. You'll shuffle that, and then that'll form the final draw deck, and as you keep buying, you're going to put out more of them. Now, as soon as that auction round has ended, or if the step 3 card came out during a different part of the game other than the auction round, you will immediately, and once more, one time, you will remove that, and you'll remove the lowest from the game again, so those are out of game. And from now on, your power plant market will consist of 6 cards, all of which are available for players to choose. So that's sort of the final modification. So step 2, triggered when you build a requisite number of buildings for one player, and step 3, when the card comes out. And finally, step 3 is over and the game ends when a player has built enough cities to trigger the end game. So in a 3-player game again, that is 17 cities. So as soon as anybody has built a 17th city, that will be the final round of the game. Go ahead and finish out the building phase and the bureaucracy as well. And the winner is whoever powers the most cities on that turn. Now, notice I said powers the most cities. It's not whoever built the most. It is very possible that one player builds a 17th or perhaps even an 18th city, for example. But yet, if for some reason they did not have enough plants to power all of those cities, then they might not win. It is very possible for someone who only powers 15 or 16 cities to win the game in a scenario like that. Now, the reason is, when you are buying power plants, there's a couple restrictions. One, you can only buy one at a time, and two, you're only allowed to keep 3 of your power plants at any one time. If you ever pick up a 4th, you have to immediately throw one away, and you are allowed to move resources freely across all of your power plants. So if there are resources left on the one you want to discard, just feel free to move them, so long as you have another power plant that can hold that type of resource. If you do not, unfortunately, those you're just going to have to throw those away. So because of that effect, because you only keep 3 power plants, it is very possible that if you don't buy sort of the right ones, you won't be able to power all of the cities that you've built. So that is something to keep in mind. Alright, so almost done here. One last thing to kind of be aware of, because it can be a little difficult to track. There are actually 5 different bureaucratic things that move the power plants during the game, other than the players bidding on them. The first thing is at the end of the bureaucracy phase, so at the end of each round, you had to take the highest numbered one and put it on the bottom of the deck to save for later. But after the triggering of phase 3, that switches. After phase 3 is triggered, when everyone is done at the end of the round, instead of putting the top one under, which has no point because you are at the end game, you are going to instead discard the smallest numbered one out of the game and then draw a new to kind of churn a little faster. So that's the 2 things that can happen when you end the round into the bureaucracy phase. Next, if a player has ever built enough cities that it equals the number on one of the power plants in the market, that power plant is immediately discarded. That rule is actually a little tricky to remember if you're playing over a face-to-face board. It's definitely something that can slip the mind, so just kind of do your best to remember. So if the bottom plant is a 9, if there happens to be a bit of a stall and people aren't buying plants as quickly as they could, then as soon as someone builds up to 9 cities, that plant is going to go. And as many as they build. If they build 9 and 10, they are out as well. Next, so that's the third thing. Next, if during an entire auction phase, if nobody chooses to buy a power plant because they're just kind of waiting on each other, then that will cause the lowest numbered one to be removed as well. So that's the 4th thing. And then finally, the 5th thing is that when someone triggers step 2, you will one time toss the low one. And I guess technically there is a 6th, which is that when the step 3 card is processed after it's been drawn, you will throw that and the smallest plant away as well. So a lot of little kind of slightly difficult to remember pieces of managing the power plant deck. And although it's not a huge problem, if you forget one of them, then you end up with a bit of a slower moving deck, and that might potentially slow the game down. So those are all the rules for playing Power Grid. Hope you enjoy.